I'm Tracy Elliott. I'm working for the Inter-Academy Partnership, the global network of science academies around the world, on two projects, one of which you'll hear about today. We have some very good speakers, I think, to give you different perspectives of how we are empowering or endeavouring to empower scientists and society to support the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the title of our session. The organisers for this event are the merit-based academies. So for those of you who don't know who we are, the Inter-Academy Partnership is a global network of science and medical academies around the world, over 130 of them. They are national academies and regional academies, and they are merit-based. So they are representing some of the very best scientists in their countries and their regions. They have life membership, and they are nominated by their peers on the basis of their scientific excellence. So it's a global network. The other partner on this project is the Global Young Academy and the National Young Academies. The Global Young Academy and National Young Academies are a sort of younger equivalent of the senior academies, as we call them. There are 33, I think, and counting, National Young Academies. It's a growing number of young scientists around the world who are organising themselves around important issues. Their membership is based on it's a 5-year term, firstly, so it's time dependent, it's not a life membership, and it's based on their scientific excellence, but also their commitment to service, 5 years. In addition to the National Young Academies, there is the Global Young Academy, which is a global academy of 200 members, representing around 58 different countries, and all continents are represented. And as I say, it's on the basis of scientific excellence and their commitment to service. So those are the partners, and most of the session really is predominantly about how we mobilise those academies, but also thinking about the wider communities with which we work. The basis of our session is the IAP project, which I'm directing, and which we have a number of working group members and our co-chair here. The project is called Improving Scientific Input to Global Policy Making. It's a 3-year project. And it comprises a working group of IEP member academies and GYA nominations, as well as ICSU. And you'll have heard about ICSU, I think, from Professor McBean in the opening session, which is also another global network of scientists around the world. The project broadly aims to raise the awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially amongst the academy community, to explore opportunities to support the SDGs more effectively, with a focus on how the academies can play their part systemically, and to encourage collaboration and adoption of good practice, I hasten to say best practice, but good practice amongst organisations that generate scientific advice and support. And the 3 pillars of this project are mobilisation, capacity building and collaboration. And coming to events like this and talking to people and raising the profile of the SDGs is a core part of this project. So, at the heart of the UN's Agenda 2030 is inclusion and leaving no one behind. So the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, on which you've heard quite a bit already over the last couple of days, were shaped following the largest consultation programme in UN history. And essentially, they are owned by all of us as citizens of the world. 2 years into this 15-year framework, their implementation requires the best minds, resources, business models, and innovations from all sectors, and with all parts of society embracing them. So this thematic session will explore some of the ways in which the global science community is endeavouring to engage its own communities and the wider society on the Sustainable Development Goals, with a predominant focus on the academies, as I say. So how this session will work: the panellists will briefly introduce themselves and then give around a 10-minute presentation. And what I'll do is, after each presentation, if there are 1 or 2 burning questions that are specific to what you've just heard, I'll take those, and then we'll move on to the next one. And I think then perhaps we'll just collate it all at the end and have an open discussion towards the end of the session, hopefully for a large part of that session. So I think without further ado, can I invite Eva Alisic, please, to come to the stage and give her presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. Keith, kom. How are you? Good. Nee. So my name is Eva Adesic, and I am co-chair of this IAP project. I'm also a former co-chair of the Global Young Academy, and I work at Monash University in Australia. And I'm curious about the people in the room. Some of you I know very well, but not all of you. How many of you are a member of an academy? Yes, many. And how many of you work on the SDGs in some capacity? All right, about half of the room. More even. Okay. How many can name 7 SDGs just from the top of your head? Couple, really good. How many 17 SDGs? No? Do you want to give it a try? No. Here they are. And they are really inspirational. It's not bureaucratic diplomats. You know all 17? Fantastic. And they're really inspirational topics that we care about to make our world a better place. And with the survey of the academies of science, medicine, engineering, and also especially the young academies are across disciplines, we've wanted to get a baseline of what the academies are doing with regard to the SDGs. And much of what I'm going to say, I think, is also applicable to professional associations, because there's a lot that can be done also outside of the academies. So we did a survey among 88 different academies. It's about 55% of our total group. We had 57 senior academies and 30 young, 30 out of the 33, and the Global Young Academy. And it really provides us with a snapshot of where the academies are at and what they would like to do also in the future. So we got a quite good regional representation or global representation among the academies. And one of the questions was, how do they see their role? And first, I have to admit, we had a number of academies where we had to explain the abbreviation of SDG. It's not common language for everybody yet, at least at the time of when we did the survey. So this is about November last year, a year ago. But the academies also had lots of things to say and had a vision on their role. So they mentioned, for example, access to the evidence, and also just providing that access, and also making it possible to monitor progress and provide information and expertise regarding metrics, understanding the gaps between different SDGs and the trade-offs. You've seen that thick book by ICSU, the International Council for Science, about a number of SDGs and how they are linked and how they influence each other. They can bring interdisciplinary perspectives, and again, those academies that bring those disciplines already together within their organization are well placed to do that. They can, of course, promote the importance of the SDGs, help have a dialogue among people who are involved, so not only within academia, but also policymakers, people from development banks, from businesses, everybody involved, really. Of course, there's a role to play in terms of making sure that the research that underpins what we can do is conducted, so coherent research policies, nominating experts for committees, and finally horizon scanning was mentioned as well. As academics are well placed to reflect on the future, and have sometimes, although we often feel constrained by deadlines all the time, I think, but we do have this opportunity to look beyond 2030. And the typical motives for the academies with regard to the SDGs were partly personal interest in what themes they wanted to work on. That's the green part there. But also national priorities, as you would expect, and international priorities. Now, which SDGs have had the attention? And the ones that stand out, you can easily see, education, health, climate. This is what they published on, but it's also very similar to what they plan to publish on. So again, climate and health education stand out there. And we looked at the academies in the MENA region a little bit more as well, and they, in general, in terms of responses, were very similar to the overall group of academies. But here what you see is water, for example, stands out a bit more, which is, not difficult to understand. Where do the academies then see barriers was one of our questions, and the things that came up were capacity, capability, especially members not knowing where to start, what the SDGs really involve, and how to get started. Lack of resources sometimes, in terms of time or finances, visibility. Some academies felt that they were under-recognized or underutilized, and my guess would be that this applies to professional associations as well, at least in my field of psychology. I see that there's a lot of value to be provided by the associations, but the connection is not always there. Some gaps in scientific knowledge. I mean, you can provide access to the evidence, but it's very difficult if there is no evidence or it's incredibly conflicted. And a gap between national priorities and those global goals. Sometimes countries are really aligning their national strategies to the global goals, but sometimes also they have a different set of national priorities, and then it's hard for an academy to know how to bring those parts together. What academies can do, basically it's recapping part of what I've just said based on what we got in terms of input from the academies, and we are finalizing a guide for the academies to get started on engagement with regard to the SDGs. So we discussed the ways that they can engage, as well as where are the entry points, where can you start? And a couple of examples are the UN Multi-Stakeholder Forum that happens in May. Sorry. I'm still struggling with a bit of a cold. Thank you. The Global Sustainable Development Report. Thanks. And for example, also the voluntary national review. So many countries are engaging in a national review to see where their progress is at the moment with regard to the SDGs. And for example, Australia, the country where I work, will have one in 2018. And it is for academies a really interesting moment to look at how can we contribute to that process, and who are the stakeholders who are involved in it. And also, how is my country doing in terms of the SDGs? So if you're interested actually with regard to your country and just a rough snapshot of how it's doing, there is this website which is called sdgindex.org. And it has these great profiles, kind of a circle diagram with all the SDGs in it, and it shows you in green, orange, and red how well on each SDG your country is doing. It's worth having a look at. Other things are, for example, small-scale events with UN agencies and international research programs that Manfred will be talking about. Apologies. And of course, it's not only about engaging with those key organizations, but also providing outreach. And with the project, we try to do that, but also the academies can do that themselves. And a couple of examples, again, with the UN, for example, is the UN Multi-Stakeholder Forum, but also the Worldwide Academy Meeting of Young Academies in last July had a visit to a township, for example, in South Africa, engaging youth with regard to the SDGs. And today, of course, and the World Science Forum is a fantastic outreach opportunity. Another resource that will be available very soon is the online database we're making with a repository of Academy reports regarding the SDGs. So that will be online, hopefully, in the very near future, and it will make it possible for you to look at the reports that have been published already across I'm really sorry. Can you finish my presentation? Badly timed. I'll try to finish it. There's just 2 more slides, sorry. It's across regions. You can search for region. And you can search for also the SDGs. And you see here as well the same, that, for example, poverty and peace, which were also tiny in the world clouds, are less present here, but health and education are very present. I have to, it's very emotional, no. When I can speak again, I'm very interested in your involvement with the SDGs, so I hope we get a chance to discuss that today. And also, if you're part of an academy and you want to see it more active regarding the SDGs, we would be very keen. So please get in touch.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for making it through that presentation. It's obviously a hugely emotional experience for you. So can I ask, well, are there any burning questions, 1 or 2 questions that we can... Perhaps we'll give Eva a chance just to recover her voice, and we'll move on to Mohammed Saidam, who will speak next. I'm just going to find out where your presentation is. Did you load it on here?
I also have a cold, if that's, but I'm recovering, I promise you. Let me take a minute just to recognize Professor McBean, Gordon McBean. He's the president of ICSO. I'm really glad that he could make it. Also, I saw president of Comstech, maybe he popped out. So thank you for coming to the session. I wanted actually to start my presentation by asking our Jordanian colleagues how much they are aware of the VNR that Eva mentioned, but it seems the majority are non-Jordanians in the meeting. Okay, so my presentation is in 2 parts. The first actually is about VNR, because I believe this is an opportunity for Jordan. It should have been actually an opportunity where we come together as scientists and policymakers to review our STI plans and to agree on a different philosophy of how we do things as compared with the Millennium Development Goals. Why did it go? Okay. So the first part will be about the voluntary national report that Jordan submitted to the high-level political forum this year. Does everybody have heard of what the high political forum is about? Okay. Now, the VNR, the voluntary national reports, are reports that countries volunteer, as the name indicates, to prepare a report to brief the high-level political forum in the General Assembly in the United Nations about the progress that the country made in implementing Agenda 2030 towards achieving the SDGs. And Jordan was one of 44 countries that has presented its report last July. I wanted to ask how many of the scientists here have heard of this or knew of this. At least a few Jordanians I can see. Did any of you came along this, heard of this, have any idea what it is? No? Okay. Well, so it's really good to flag this and to talk about it. So maybe we have really trigger a change in the way we deal with SDGs in the next decade. The other part of my presentation is to draw attention to the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report that's being prepared by the independent group of scientists. And in particular, the call for inputs by the group, which has been out last week. And I'm a member as well of this group, in addition of being the chief scientist in the Royal Scientific Society. As I mentioned, VNRs are intended to report to the UN on the progress made in implementing SDGs nationally. And it should have been actually an opportunity for the national scientific community and the governmental agency in charge of preparing the report. And in our case, it's the Ministry of Planning who are in charge of this. But it seems that the Ministry of Planning has gone business as usual, like it used to do with the Millennium Development Goals, where it just prepared the report without really engages science into it or the scientific community. Now, from MDGs to SDGs, the story is so different because SDGs are much more complicated than MDGs because they are supposed to be more inclusive and they are encompassing. Not supposed to be, they are in fact, in the way they have been designed, more inclusive, encompassing, and more integrative in a sense of tackling the three main pillars of sustainable development, that is economic aspects, environmental aspects, as well as social aspects. While in MDGs that was not really the case. They are interconnected and evidence-based, and they advocate ownership with a view of the international implications of the national actions. But the agenda and the SDGs remain actually merely a guide that countries have to adapt locally and execute accordingly. And what's perhaps is more distinctive about SDGs is that Central has been recognized to play a central role in this process as compared with MDGs. So here are challenges and opportunities. Challenges here for us in Jordan, and in fact when I say in Jordan, that's very much similar to the MENA region because most of the Arab countries have similar problems. Maybe Jordan is in a better position in different aspects, but still I think it optimizes the situation in the MENA region. The other challenge is there's a need for policymakers, scientists, and society to work together if we ever to achieve the SDGs. That's what's the challenge. Now, the opportunity here is that the SDGs, actually, the framework of the SDGs includes all the aspirations that we have been working towards for many years. And that is through our executive governmental programs. So we would find the narrative is so much similar to the international agenda. So it's the opportunity here is that we make use of this international initiative, which has UN backing, and there are so many opportunities, financing and others, and align our executive program with the international agenda. It's also a golden opportunity for the scientific community to revise science, technology, and innovation plans. And SDG 9 specifically talks about, and I quote here, to build resilience, resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation. But obviously, science and technology is really a horizontal, it just goes across all the SDGs. And it goes from the design into the monitoring, into the implementation of the whole process. So the question now, from SDGs and 2030 agenda perspective, to what extent are current SD policies, plans, and implementation knowledge-based have factored in the VNR? How much scientists and policymakers did interact, and how much they are interacting now? Do they intend to do so in the future? But regardless of the answer, which I think can be either or, I think we really have to have a review of this relationship if we ever to achieve the SDGs, the 17 SDGs. Okay, so that part is on the VNRs. Now I want just to briefly describe the work of the independent group of scientists in which I am a member, who will be preparing the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report. And I have to ask here, how many of you have heard of this before? Very well, very few. Very few. Okay, the Global Sustainable Development Report is a science advisory instrument, if you like, to the highest political forum in the United Nations. It's according to which that the General Assembly take decisions that do affect actually the whole development process in the whole world. So it's a very essential thing that we actually come to learn more about it, because if you are as a scientist working whether in energy, water, education, what have you, because as you know, the 17 SDGs which Eva showed, they actually cover a lot of issues that touch on our lives and our future. Anyway, the independent group of scientists is a group that was appointed by the United Nations to write this report. Previously, this report was written by the UN agencies. But this time, the General Assembly decided that they want this to be a scientific report written by an independent group, and thus the group was formed from scientists representing the whole world. So the mandate of the IGS, the independent group of scientists, is to prepare the GSDR as stipulated in the ministerial declaration of the high-level political forum, and there are exact terms of reference for the group. And the role includes research and drafting with extensive support from a UN team. The UN team that supports the group comes from UNESCO, from UNEP, from UNDP, the World Bank, and UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. And we receive logistical support from the development section in the United Nations. Okay, I'll finish. And the inputs that goes into the report is really from existing networks. Okay, that's a photo of the group preparing the report. Okay, until now we had 3 meetings, face-to-face meetings, and another 3 meetings on webinars, and we agreed on certain things. I'll go quickly through them in the sake of time. In the first meeting, we agreed that the report that will come in 2019 and will be presented to the high-level political forum, and that will coincide with the convening of the General Assembly. The report should help address implementation from a scientific perspective. It should be action-oriented, drawing on previous experiences while focusing on challenges, addressing emerging issues, and highlighting trends. It should assume naturally an integrated approach and it should account for regional dimensions as well as countries in special conditions. And that countries in special conditions refer really to countries that in war, like Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen. I mean, that's why it was really added here. So the initial reflections of the group that this is really a very ambitious and challenging job because of the integrative characteristic of the SDGs and the need to be inclusive, and it also needs an inter and multidisciplinary approach. Okay, this is more or less the concept that we have came up with, and the report will be built on 4 building blocks, and these are quickly on interactions between different SDGs and 169 targets. I'll give a quick example. If you are working in water, for example, and you do a water project, you cannot do your project without taking into account the implications which are positive or negative, like in the energy, on the society, on poverty, etc. Okay, I know Tracy is looking and showing me again. I have 1 minute. The other one is pathways towards development. And pathways should integrate interactions as well as the role of science, another building block into the pathways. And in fact, we have another meeting in Helsinki next month, where about 100 scientists from around the world will be meeting there specifically to deal with pathways. And the meeting was actually supported by the Finnish government and the French government because they knew the importance of coming together and discussing and having all the views on what are the pathways towards achieving the SDGs. Okay, so I will skip this because I already discussed the 4. Yeah, okay, the four building blocks. And the last slide here is the call. Now, any one of you can actually, I will make sure that you have this link, but I mean, with Google nowadays, it's very easy to access this. And there is a call for input. So please do check this, because if you are interested in getting your work to be acknowledged, if you're interested in sustainable development and helping your country and the world, please do go through this. And there are many ways in which you can contribute through peer-reviewed work or even through consultants' reports, etc. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Any specific questions with regard to that? Otherwise, we'll move on. We've got one here. Thank you.
My question, this is Iqbal first. This is Iqbal Hamad from the Director of Women Empowerment and Gender Program at Johad. My question is, you, sir, mentioned that earlier in your presentations that the government used to set the laws or the SDGs in this case in the absence of the scientists. So what about the society, especially that the theme of this session is talking about empowering scientists and the social. So are they also involved in the setting this SDGs, sorry, or the reports, or they are excluded totally? Thank you.
It's quite the opposite, in fact. As I said, the meaning of inclusive is that you have to include all sectors, even of the society, empowering women, the marginalized. You have to have everybody. I mean, that's the essence, and that's what really characterizes the new SDGs. It leaves no one behind. I mean, that's the slogan, that's the motto, leaving no one behind. And that includes even scientific input. And that's why in the call of inputs that we are calling for, we made sure, I mean, we understand there in many countries, there are not peer-reviewed work so much. And that's a controversial point, because we want to include definitely things that have been validated through peer reviewing, but also we'll consider in countries that do not have peer review, we will consider consultants' reports, for example, and studies. So, all included.
Thank you for your question. I think in the interests of time, we'll move on to our next speaker, and we'll come back. Is that okay? We'll come back. Professor Manfred Langner will speak about his work with the ICSU Future Earth MENA region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the session. My name is Manfred Langner, as was said. I'm working at the Cyprus Institute, and I'm the director of the Regional Center for Future Earth for this very region. Now, let me start by just saying a very brief word of thank you to the organizers. I'm delighted to be here, and I have to say this has been a conference unprecedented. I'm really impressed. Let me take a little step backwards towards the region, and this is what the region looks like, and many of you, of course, are well familiar with it. Let me mention a few of the major characteristics. The MENA region is home to some 400 million people, and it's growing. There are multiple pressures on water supply, energy generation, food security, and environmental integrity. So we basically talk about the water, energy, food nexus and related issues. There is an exceedance of environmental thresholds that are observed in the region which pose threats to human well-being. There we are. And they are just water scarcity, desertification, changes in terrestrial and marine ecosystems, an increased number of heat waves, dust storms, enhanced PM25, so aerosol concentrations, which pose serious threats to human health. So you can see there's always this relationship to SDGs, like in this case, human health. And there is enhanced warming in urban structures. I will come back to these issues in a moment. So and in addition, of course, there are significant political and societal transformations and a crisis even in this region, which exacerbate the risks to human well-being in the region. Demographics. The MENA region is one of the fastest growing regions in the world. And you see the growth in population since 1960 by a factor of 4. And secondly, the urban population has continuously increased relative to rural communities, which, as I'll point out in a second, create additional challenges. Sorry, that was the bottom line. So we have an increased amount of demand for energy, food, and water. Now, moreover, the Mediterranean region is a region, and the Eastern Mediterranean is a region of high urbanization, and it's illustrated in the slide. And the population densities in these centers is increasing, and given the current demographic trends, this is going to continue, and urban centers are going to increase, which imply again an increase in human security threats, and again I'll come to that in a moment in more detail. So climate change, of course, we all are aware of it, but climate change is poised to be particularly relevant in this region. The MENA region, or the Mediterranean basin, has been called a climate change hotspot for a good reason. And what you see here, and I'm not going into that in any detail, are two projections of climate change based on regional climate modeling that we're doing at the Cyprus Institute. And you see the increase in winter temperatures and summer temperatures at mid-century of this century. So what you're seeing is that, particularly in winter, we talk climate temperatures between 4 and 6 degrees relative to the pre-industrial, or to the reference periods 1960 to 1990. What that means in terms of cities is just illustrated here in this little table. In Nicosia, we found that today, while we today have temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius, or about 60, a number of 60, in the near future, we'll have an increase by 42% to 85 And by the end of the century, we have a doubling of these very hot days. And the same can be said for so-called tropical nights with temperatures above 25 degrees centigrade. So this is what climate change looks like in the region. In terms of urban structures, I don't have time to go into that, but what's shown here are summer temperatures. The blue bars show the deviation of mean summer temperatures June, July, August for the reference period 1961 to 1990, and the red bars show the expected or the projected temperature increases in these 3 months for the future. And the point to note here is that the coldest summer month today will be, the coldest summer month in the future will be hotter and warmer than the hottest summer days today. So that's what lies in store for us in terms of global warming and urban centers. Water. Water in the MENA region, even though it's home to 6.3% of world's population, the access to water resources is only 1.4%. So and there we have a direct, of course, link to SDG 6, which was mentioned earlier. 70% to 85% of the water is used for irrigation, agriculture. However, the average water use efficiency is only 50 to 60% in agriculture. Moreover, the water losses in urban distribution networks accounts to 30 to 50% of the total supply. And we observe a number of poor management practices, overpumping of aquifers, deterioration of water quality, diminishing groundwater aquifers due to inappropriate agricultural practices. And so what we need is we need to improve administrative structures in many MENA countries. And moreover, I think what we need is really to enhance education, research, and training in water-related issues in most MENA countries. And this brings me to my next point, water competence. Water competence is a term that you may know from in other contexts. I sort of use this term to exemplify or to mean the ability, knowledge, and skill of individuals or groups to decide on the utilization of water for any purpose in a sustainable way and without affecting its quality and subsequent use. Now, we need to raise water competence that requires attention to a number of wider-reaching concepts and conditions. One, I think, is we need to change the perception of water as a scarce resource. We need to take into consideration historical practices of water utilization. We need to look at cultural and spiritual values of water and the educational level of water consumers. You can see we are looking at not just, quote unquote, water issues per se, but this goes far beyond the sort of natural sciences-based approach of water management. So education and training needs to consider regional, local values and traditions, and we will, I think we as scientists will have to respect them carefully. The use of non-conventional water resources, particularly desalination, which is practiced in some of the countries in the MENA region, needs to be flanked by raising awareness for remaining water security and not just taken as a given. Now, in order to improve water competence, we at the Cyprus Institute have engaged in summer schools called the Young Scholars Forum, and just give you a brief rundown on that. We did the last one in 2015 with participation both from the region and from Europe. Now, why do we do this? We do this to enhance mutual learning, mutual understanding between the sort of northernness, quote unquote, and the MENA students and young researchers. And this has proven to be a very effective and a very beneficial, mutually beneficial exercise. So the participation of both MENA and European scholars was really important. And although we did not focus exclusively on water, that was a major topic. And I think the Young Scholars Forum we see as a blueprint for similar activities in the MENA region. Let me briefly come to Future Earth. Now, Future Earth, as you know, is a major science initiative, the major science initiative today, built on three basic principles: interdisciplinarity, engagement of stakeholders and actors, and action-based research. Now, in order to pursue this, Future Earth has come up with a number of focal challenges: cities, health, consumption, natural capital, food, water, energy nexus, decarbonization, rural development, and governance. And you can, I think, immediately see that there's a strong linkage and interrelationship between these focal challenges and the SDGs. And of course, there is also institutionally a strong interaction between the two organizations. So I don't have more time for that, but the Future Earth is really a major undertaking that I think links very closely with SDGs and the achievement of this Sustainable Development Goals. Very briefly, Future Earth MENA. As I said, we are the regional center. Future Earth is governed by a central secretariat and a number of regional nodes. The regional centers are are an element of the central secretariat. We serve needs of the local to regional communities, and our main goals are the creation of regional governance structures, drafting of a MENA research agenda, assisting in funding research, and last but not by no means least, engage in training and capacity building in the region and linking up with regional national stakeholders. In conclusion, I hope I could at least briefly illustrate that the MENA region is a region of significant diversity, pressing challenges, and expected enhanced climate change. Global climate change is real and has significant adverse consequences and impacts in the MENA region. I think we all feel this. Climate warming is exacerbated in cities and urban structures. Anticipated population growth, mainly in urban centers, poses particular severe challenges, and our small center aims to advance solutions for MENA cities and for the MENA region in total. And we pay particular attention to capacity building because we think it's of utmost importance. With that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Manfred. One question while we're setting up the next presentation. Any burning questions? One at the back here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting presentation, actually. Yeah, it's me. This is Kawthar Hamad from Jordan, Telecommunication Regulatory Commission. I want to ask, please, about the warming, the global warming that you talked about in the Arabic countries that is related to the population. Now, what is the comparison between the warming in the Middle East or in the MENA countries compared to the warming in the industrial developed countries?
As I said,
thank you.
There we go. As I said, as climate projections show, the Middle East and the Mediterranean basin as a whole stands out as a region of enhanced warming relative to the global mean warming. So that's why, again, it was coined a global change hotspot, because the warming that is expected lies above that what we expect for the industrial world or for most of the other regions of the world, which again highlights the importance of looking at climate change and its impacts in the region.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll move on to our final presentation, which is Ishal Kurnash, who will tell us a little bit about what the Global Young Academy is doing in terms of mobilizing its own community and wider society. So thank you, Ishal.
First of all, thank you very much for the organization. It's really impressive, just like the speakers before me have focused on. And it's really a challenge to speak after all of them. I will not talk particularly about the MENA because unfortunately I haven't come up with any examples from the MENA region, but I'll try to summarize the international outreach platforms that we have been trying to set up as Global Young Academy, some members of which are among the audience today. So first of all, I was told to increase awareness of Global Young Academy. Who are we, what we do? It's a network of about some 200 members and 134 alumni from 70 different countries. So it's a huge network of young scientists. If you haven't heard about it, please do distribute this knowledge and get people to apply. It's a 5-year membership in which we're trying to address several different challenges. When you look at the continent distribution, it's pretty much balanced, impressively so actually. So nobody gets left out. And discipline-wise as well, we have a balanced distribution. Gender-wise too, I didn't put all of the slides up. So we're trying to address several significant questions that have been addressed before me from our perspectives. The aims of Global Young Academy are to support young scientists in career development and independence. Of course, that's the priority for the young scientists, but also to engage in interdisciplinary, international, and intergenerational dialogue on scientific issues, mainly with mother academies, of course, and other policymakers, to build science capacity in the developing world, as well as to promote science education and science policy integration. It's this last one that I will touch upon today. So the main 3 themes that you see on the right here are the science and society, research environment, science education, and outreach. Which one is the... So what are the main themes of the Global Young Academy? I think I'll use this laser pointer if you don't mind. It's easier for me to monitor things. So we have the science and society, research environment, and science education and outreach as the 3 major themes, and underneath them we have several different working groups. I'm a new member, by the way, so if you ask me questions about them, I may refer you to some of the more experienced members among the audience. I put several different SDGs down there. But this is one of the main points that I would like to make. Although most of the activities we do, knowingly or unknowingly, fit into these categories, not many of even the young scientists are aware of many of the SDGs and consciously integrate them into their activities. We're mostly unconsciously doing these things. So these SDG symbols that you find there are not necessarily an integrated part, but more an indirect activity. Now, what I mean by that will come in a second. Where do I fit into this? Under the science education outreach theme, we have several different working groups. You will hear about some of them later on. This afternoon, for example, there's a session about young scientists that includes the Young Scientist Ambassador Program. We also have heard about different things throughout the session. Eva is has been doing some research there. And science education for youth is the part that I'm engaged in together with Anindita Badra, and Connie is among the audience today. So what's the ultimate goal of this science education for youth working group? We want to engage young people through different science cafes, festivals, or different science fairs, different forms of outreach activities, but not only young people, but also citizens. This may include their mothers, their parents, their teachers, or sometimes even formal policymakers like mayors, etc., to enable them to make well-informed decisions and act responsibly, especially in a time of DIY science and open access, which has also been discussed here. We also want to be role models to future scientists. as well as to engage girls in STEM activities through providing female scientist role models in a balanced manner. And you will see some pictures from mainly female scientists doing these outreach activities in the coming slides. That was my bias, excuse me for that. So empowering scientists and society to support the SDGs is a natural part of this working group. I will give you some examples of what has been done. Science is Action was done by Connie in the audience through her own efforts, actually, because money-wise, we have to mobilize our own funds as well. It's a lot of self-giving in the Global Young Academy, and as well as scientists all over the world to try and incorporate all of these outreach activities. And in an unconscious manner, I would say, she has addressed quality in education and gender equality issues, of course, because we were trying to, well, she was trying to educate children about, for example, road safety, plant reproduction, or teaching different models to students. Underprivileged students were introduced to science. I myself organized Brain Awareness Week in Istanbul through different funds again. Once again, we're trying to mobilize our own funds. And in here, most of the lecturers and assistants who helped teach the kids about neuroscience in this particular instance were females. Mostly female professors, female research assistants, and we were covering, like Connie did, a large range of youth, 5 years to 15 years old. And you may say, that's not really society, but they are the future society. They might be future leaders of the world. So it's a good idea to start educating them about science and implementing certain symbols into their heads. Just like that, in Cambodia, there was a community outreach program, sorry for the misspelling, Youth for Environment and Education program. And our friend there has integrated a lot of different issues, like she has provided breakfast to students who come, which indirectly was helping the Zero Hunger business. She was trying to teach them about hygiene, about how effectively to use water. But all of those were unconscious efforts. To my knowledge, the only conscious integration of SDGs was from Canada, from Carly, who has taught students about life below water using history as an example. So I think we have a long way to go. But our aim in this particular working group that I'm trying to summarize was how do we synergize individual efforts, outreach efforts worldwide, and how do we lure young scientists to share this endeavor in line with the SDGs. This has been a problem because many young scientists, I'm sure in the MENA region, are also struggling with trying to assert themselves in the scientific world. So very little time can be dedicated to outreach, which is a shame because we're the ones who have energy and who can contact the younger generation more effectively in terms of generation gap. So the tool that our working group aims to develop, we're still in the process of setting it up, so it's not up and running yet. I would welcome any input. We're trying to organize a platform, an online platform called the Learning Space, which hopefully will help with the Partnership for Goals SDG through exchange of expertise, knowledge, and maybe technology between different groups. The idea here is to coordinate efforts, outreach efforts, by uploading, downloading different activity materials because there is no need to rediscover everything from scratch. If someone has already had an outreach activity aimed at policymakers, for example, you can use that as your starting material to share documents, experiences, feedback, even videos, live streaming, you name it. And that will have little sections, let's say, on different subject matter, discussion forums, teachers' corners, find an event near you, calendar, interactive map, whatever, and hopefully that will help spread and disseminate this effort. So all in all, mine was a quite short, I hope, and in time, presentation. Get or stay in touch. These are the Global Young Academy addresses. We would welcome any input and sharing of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Right, well, we have a good 20-25 minutes for questions and a discussion, really, with the panel. I think we've got lots of ideas of different initiatives that the academies are pursuing to try and engage and empower scientists and the wider society to get involved with the SDGs. So can we start here with the lady here who had a burning question, which I postponed? Thank you.
Is it on? Thank you. My question goes for Dr. Mohammed Saidam. First of all, my name is Rana Arda. I work for the Royal Scientific Society. Dr. Mohammed, thank you for your presentation. You showed a link in your presentation for giving feedback on the report. So who's eligible to give feedback? I mean, does anybody have the chance, the opportunity to go through that link and just read the report and give feedback? So how does this work? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody can have their input there. Anybody. It's open. It's an open call. But for this time round, the deadline is December 1st. But I guess there will be an extension because this has been delayed somehow in issuing the call. But anybody with peer-reviewed work or, as I mentioned, reports can certainly contribute. The minute you just log into the system, it's a very easy Google document format, and so it's very easy to upload any work. It's open to all.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions at a time. And can you please introduce yourself very briefly when you give your question? So this gentleman over here has been waiting.
Thank you. My name is Shaukat Hamid Khan. I head the OIC Committee on Science and Technology. I have some comments. And please forgive me. I'm an old man, so I can get away with a lot of things. We talk about climate change and other things. We all talk about global warming. We talk about temperatures. We talk about water melting and so on.
Can you move your microphone up?
You know, all these things. Let me give you one little example. Wheat cultivation will have to move northwards by about 100 kilometers for every 1 degree centigrade rise in temperature. Wheat cultivation will have to move northwards by about 100 kilometers for every 1 degree centigrade rise in temperature. And this has a big effect on many countries. Secondly, one of the things that's likely to happen is a catastrophe as regards seeds. And these certified seeds from companies is something to be very careful about. And what we need to do is build up a series of gene banks, plant DNAs, preserve and protect ourselves against future disasters. And I'm quoting this from the 10-year plan that we prepared for the OIC countries. I'm sorry for the long comment, but I thought it might be relevant because I come from people who practice things rather than just talk in general matters. So please bear with me. And gene banks is one of the major initiatives, and we think it will be very useful. Next, sir, we talk about water. Everybody talks about membranes to clean up water. Everybody talks about now about nano-sized graphene membranes made of that. Water has very funny properties. I don't trust nanoparticles, and especially of graphene coming into my supply, food supply. But let me tell you something that's happening. And I quote from the National Institute of Biotechnology and Genetic Engineering in Pakistan. They're using phytoremediation. No chemicals, no nanoparticles, and fantastic results. Sewerage, industrial effluents and waste. And very simple thing, anybody can do it. You take
Sorry, can I ask you to come to a close, because we have got a lot of people who want to ask questions.
I'm just trying to say these are things that matter and are done very cheaply. And instead of talking about general wide policies, it is what is implementable that has to be done. And let me just show you something. I've done a lot of other things in my life, but I'm very proud of this. Is a safe delivery kit. Emergencies and rural areas where you have midwives and nobody else, And you can have this, it's biosterile for 2 years if it's not opened, and costs very little. There's a bar of soap, the midwife can use it, wash her hands, put on some gloves. All the other ingredients for safe delivery are there, and sterile and very cheap. And
Okay.
these, I've
Nice,
asked the
nice
Pakistan
plug. Thank you.
government to donate this to,
I'll see if any of our
community
panelists want to
areas.
respond to that, but I'll take a few questions, a few further questions first. Peter.
Hello, I'm Peter McGrath from the coordinator of IAP in Trieste in Italy. Sure. Okay. Just a general question to the panel. Assuming that sort of science advice feeding into the SDGs and to policymakers is a process, are there any parts of that process that are working particularly well, and are there any parts that are dysfunctional, perhaps that really need attention, or bottlenecks, or anything like that?
Okay, thank you. One more question and then we'll... Yeah? Oh.
Hello, Arakanok from Thailand, another former co-chair of the Global Young Academy. My question goes directly to the two gentlemen panelists. Since you are sandwiched by our GYA members, and there are many of us among the audience, I would like to, it's very impressive to hear about your presentation, in particular the Future Earth. I would like to hear your kind of comments on to what extent that the young scientists in this room could contribute to the issues that you have addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll move to the panel to address some of those questions. Eva, do you want to start with that last question? Well, you can take any of them, but that struck me as one that was your name on it.
You mean Peter's question regarding science advice, right?
Yeah.
Yes. We're still in discovery mode with that regard. What's very clear is that there are massive differences across countries, regions. What often seems to go well is when individuals have found each other from the different sides of these issues. So if individual scientists have good connections with individual policymakers, and of course, when systems are in place, that's of course going a lot more smoothly. But it's surprisingly often that it is tied to individuals doing their work really well. I do see with what we are now developing with this guide for the science academies regarding engaging around the SDGs, that we can provide scientists, science academies with entry points, with suggestions for ways to get that started. And for example, we've been talking about a checklist. Like, can you, for example, in the induction of your new members, go through what are the SDGs in our country? What are the national priorities? What do we know about our voluntary national review coming up? Would you be interested in those issues, and in which SDGs do you specifically have a contribution to make? So lots of growth potential.
Okay, about the question about the young scientists.
If I may, I'd like to just briefly respond to the gentleman from Bangladesh. Yeah, I think your point about the seed bank is very well taken. I mentioned briefly about the impacts on environmental integrity, meaning also loss of biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the assembly of seeds and plant species, etc., is a really important issue in terms of adaptation to climate change. So I think this should really be pursued. The issue of the young generation and its contribution. I mean, I was really impressed by the plenary this morning, and I think in terms of what the young generation can contribute, aside from its sort of curiosity and innovative spirit, maybe you can particularly help us who are still sort of pursuing these things in a more traditional way by introducing the fourth revolution, the digitization of science and innovation. So I think that's one role that the young generation could play, in addition to, again, cultivating or introducing unconventional ways of dealing with the issues of water management, for instance, or water efficiency, etc. So I think, yes, definitely, the young generation has a major role to play in that. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, our Pakistani colleague has left, but I think he was really touching on a very important issue. I mean, if they can come up with technologies that are of low cost, and they can actually accelerate achieving the implementing the agenda and accelerate achieving SDGs, that would be excellent, and that will be a great contribution in a pathway that would alleviate poverty, provide for the poor. So it's really, he was talking about something that's really fundamental.
Okay, any more questions, please? Okay, at the back.
My name is Biniam Sisai, and I'm from Ethiopia, and I'm also a member of the Global Young Academy. One point that has been highlighted during the presentations was the fact that SDGs, as compared to the MDGs, are more, at least they give an opportunity for contextualizing them to countries' particular situations. I think this is, we all understand that the SDGs are general to general, and when they have to be applied for each of the countries, and countries have their own priorities. But I also see that this is it opens a particular opportunity for especially scientists to bridge this particular gap between general SDGs and contextualizing them to the particular situation of each country. So I would like you to comment, what do you see the role of the scientists would be in making SDGs relevant and contextualized to the needs of particular countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question. Any more questions? Yeah, I was going to do just two or three at a time, but Connie.
Thank you very much. My name is Connie Shemireirwe. I'm from Uganda, and I'm also a member of the Global Young Academy. I'm very glad to hear that the IAP project is creating a guide for national young academies and other academies on how to engage with the SDGs. But I'd also like to, and also I was glad to hear actually that Future Earth concentrates on capacitating scientists. But I'd like to add one thing that Eva mentioned in her presentation is the fact that scientists feel that governments do not approach them for advice. But I would also like to say that I think we need to think more about getting scientists to make the step towards the governments and towards the SDGs. So as much as we can tell them, oh, the SDGs are like this and you should engage, we also need to help them change the attitude that they have towards expecting to be approached, and to, especially through training, leadership training and so on, to get them to feel more responsible towards initiating the engagement themselves. So this is what I would like to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the two good questions there. Who would like to tackle the first?
I could just start to respond to your question. I think your point is very well taken. I mean, SDGs and other lofty goals, of course, need to be sort of broken down to the local or at least national specificities, of each country. So, and that's, I think, my Future Earth is indeed doing this. They're not. Well, of course, they're a global organization, yes, but they really stress that the interaction and the co-development of research and the co-utilization of research has to be local or at least national. So I think, yes, we need to take that into consideration, even though, of course, it's sometimes easier to talk about the globe and global issues. We need to break it down. We need to really be specific, and I think that's what we also try in the MENA region with this little center that we have, to look at what are the specific needs of the countries in the region and how can we address them in the context of Future Earth or the SDGs. But again, I think one cannot overestimate the importance of region and local specific solutions and approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
On our Ethiopian friend question, as I said, SDGs are really complex, and they are general, as you said. I agree to that. And achieving the 17 SDGs is really just like a ticket to paradise. I mean, everybody knows that. So prioritizing these SDGs is really essential. But I think, in my view, any development plan of any country would somehow will be under this framework of the international SDGs. But here, where we need scientists, policymakers, the whole society, including, as I said, leaving no one behind, all have to be really engaged in localizing the agenda and go for the priorities. Maybe clustering of some SDGs is one of the ideas that was raised many times. I haven't seen this, working anywhere, but I think it's one of the potential ideas because, as I said, it's complex and it's very, very expensive, and I think it's beyond many countries, especially in the developing world, to achieve.
Eva, do you want to say anything about scientists being more proactive and taking initiative?
Yes, I wanted to do that. And also to Binyam's question, I wanted to feedback again that website with the profiles of the countries, the sdgindex.org, it is a nice starting point for looking at what is relevant for a particular country. And I do believe we can learn a lot from best practices in one country to the other, even though, of course, the situation is different. There is still a lot of similarity as well, so we can try and apply what works somewhere else. With regard to Connie's great point regarding engagement and attitude, I think it is a process. In my mind, we don't meet each other enough. Scientists and policymakers, and also people in businesses and in development banks and citizen scientists and just concerned citizens or engaged citizens. In my view, we need to spend much more time together, really listening to each other and also living in each other's world a little bit. So I'm always a big fan of these ideas of internships, where you go and work, for example, in a ministry for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and really understand what the issues are, and understand the world and what the limitations and pressures are, and also the opportunities. And then you grow a lot more understanding of just each other's environment, but also the needs and how we can better work together. So I hope that we will see an increase in those type of exchanges. Same for policymakers to spend time in a university department and find out how all that thinking happens, and how we can best make use of it.
Ishal, do you want to add anything?
I think Eva raised a very good point. Internship is an excellent idea. I just want to point out that it might not be as easy in every culture to do that, because in some cultures, even in Turkey, where it's relatively open, still it's very difficult to break the barriers, especially for young scientists. I mean, more established researchers have their connections with policymakers, and it's kind of layered system where you cannot even break barriers into senior academy level. it's even more difficult to break your way into ministries for internship. So maybe we should discuss in a future meeting how we could establish that. But it would be an excellent way to get in touch and push our way into the policymakers. My little idea there, maybe a little bit of a solution there, again coming back to my the outreach activities, to my presentation, maybe to start small and try to connect with children who will become the future policymakers. I think it's a little too late for us in this generation, so maybe we can address the future generations who will be the actual people suffering from the problems that we have all discussed.
And it comes back to university curricula as well. I mean,
Yes.
at the university, some of us will go and become policymakers, some of us will go into industry, some of us will go into research. So I still think that that's a fantastic moment that we have to really
it's an
try and start
opportunity.
with that exchange.
Well, we're on our 5-minute countdown now, so I'm going to take 2 very, very quick questions, and then we'll ask each panelist just to wrap up with 1 sentence each, what they think is their take-home message. So please be thinking about that. Tolu.
Hi, I'm Tolu Oni. I'm the co-chair of the Global Young Academy. My question relates to a common first from the previous round around the SDGs and the concurrency of a lot of the goals. So the one thing that I haven't specifically heard is the interactions, the actual interactions between the SDGs and the fact that one of the key challenges to addressing them is policy incoherence with these SDGs. So you have a policy addressing one SDG, policy addressing another SDG, and they're actually pulling apart. I know that the ICSU developed a report looking at some SDGs and the interactions between them, but I wanted to ask the panel what role, any examples you have seen in terms of the role that scientists can play, including young scientists, to start to facilitate, either through their science and interdisciplinary approaches, or in other ways, to facilitate addressing SDGs, bearing in mind these interactions and the importance of coherence of policies.
Okay. Very, very quickly then, please. Just one last quick question, and then we'll...
So the thing that impressed me most here is the mobilization of the scientific effort on such a, pardon me? My name is John Malone. I'm from the United States. One of the things that impresses me the most is the mobilization of the global scientific community on these defined goals, the 17 SDGs. And I can't think of any other effort in the past of this global mobilization of scientific effort. So how can we extend what's going on in the scientific community here to businesses, local communities? How can you get this network outside of scientists to really enhance and accelerate accomplishing the 17 SDGs? This seems to be such an important thing to do. I was curious to know what you all think about that.
Thank you. Okay, responses to those last 2 questions. Isha.
No matter what I have said in the previous round, I have a few good examples from Turkey. NGOs are a great place to start. And regarding the climate SDG, there have been such efforts connecting the ministries and the Turkish environmental organizations, local authorities. Many different cities are now involved in trying to come up with their own implementation plans regarding climate change. And the NGOs are actually mobilizing businesses in each of the cities. So that might be a good place to start, at least for some of the goals.
Thank you. Manfred?
Yeah, I think the points raised are excellent. I think the first one about the coherence between the different SDGs and how to make it happen, so that we don't have this sort of contradiction or whatever you want to call it between different policies. I think, again, we need to take a broader, holistic view on the SDGs. And for me, for instance, the climate SDG or the health SDG provide mechanisms, if you wish, to really look at different things. Like with the health, we can look at climate impacts on human health. We can look at water and livelihood. So I think it's important to sometimes maybe step back a bit to take a more broader, holistic view on the SDGs and not just, I mean, even though they are broad in itself, but to take this view and try to link them up. In terms of how to extend, I think that's an important issue, and I think that requires really a lot of work on the way of part of the scientists to reach out effectively to the business community, for instance, and make them understand that following and achieving SDGs will be to their economic benefit. Of course, it's not easier. It's easier said than done. I know that, but still, I think we do have arguments. We do have the mechanisms to demonstrate that this is indeed the case, and it's a way of trying to and not giving up to convince the business community to follow that. Thank you.
Mohammed?
First, on interactions of SDGs. As you know, ICSO has published this book, which you can find outside. They did it for I think 4 or 5 SDGs, but that's as a framework. And countries really have today, they have to do their own interactions because it does differ from one region to another, country to another. And this is what we have been trying to do in Jordan, to convince people that we have to do it locally. This is a good framework to use, but it has to be done. It's not an easy job, but in my view, if we get into this, if countries can get into this, then you would have engagement of scientists from different disciplines that we haven't seen before. For example, natural, because it does take, I mean, it's a must that you would have natural scientists as well as social scientists, technologists, etc., involved into the discussion, because linking SDGs together and linking, or rather looking at interactions of how SDGs interact with each other and with the targets is a very essential exercise that needs all the disciplines that one can think of. The other point about mobilization, I agree with you, our colleague from the US. In my 30 years of work, I haven't really seen such interest in development like those days. And that's great. Maybe one of the reasons that comes to mind is the fact they also address things that we all in the international community are thinking about, and that's peace, security, inclusiveness. Maybe this is one of the issues that got politicians more interested. Actually, just briefly, I could see this when I go to the UN from the different ambassadors who take direct interest in the work we are doing and the depth of knowledge they have into SDGs. And these are politicians, not scientists. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva, any last remarks? And then your final take-home message.
Yeah, well, I'll try and wrap those into one. With regard to the coherence and the trade-offs, one of the promising elements of that is that actually so far those analyses have shown that actually that it doesn't happen often that SDGs are in conflict with each other. So that's already a good start. Then the next question is, of course, to find those targets and things you can do that actually will have a positive effect on multiple SDGs and be really multipliers of an effect. So where can you be most efficient in addressing change? That's, like Mohammed says, something that needs to be evaluated on a local level, but there is a lot of promise there. On engagement, and this is also my final thought, I mean, there's so many options for us to engage, to get started, to really help this process of moving forward with the SDGs. My concern is still that we have an imbalance between the SDGs in terms of the scientific community. Like you saw in my word clouds, health, education, and climate are very prominent, and they are important. But I'm concerned that, for example, peace and poverty are less often mentioned in these surveys. So there we have work to do, I think. And then it's really looking with, for example, an academy or an association, like prioritizing what are the things that we think we are best placed to contribute. But there's a lot possible. I'm really hopeful about it.
Perhaps that's a good point to end on, conscious of time, unless you have anything else you feel we haven't covered in our final remarks. Thank you very much for your attention, everyone. We really do appreciate it. You'll see we're developing these tools that will help people navigate their way around some of these processes and engage with the SDGs. They will be out in the next few weeks. If you'd like to follow the project, if you want to get involved, please take a card here, take one of our infographics as well, which gives a summary of the project so far, and please sign up, and if you sign up your name we can send you some information as these things come out, and you can begin to use them amongst your own communities. And can we just thank our panellists, please, in the usual way for their time. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Enjoy your lunch.